Would everybody join me in a pledge of allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'll start with our roll call.
Okay, I'm going to cover roll call today. Bell Harbor HOA.
Present.
Bermuda Riviera Association.
Here.
Beverly Heights Neighborhood Association. Birch Park Beach HOA. Central Beach Alliance.
Here.
Central City Alliance. Coley Hammock.
Here.
Coral Ridge Country Club Estates. Coral Ridge Association. Here. Coral Ridge Isles HOA. Croissant Park Civic Association. Downtown Fort Lauderdale Civic Association. Edgewood Civic Association. Flagler Village Civic Association. Gulf Mile Community Association. Harbordale Civic Association. Here. Harbor Beach Property Owners. Harbor Inlet Association.
Here.
Historic Dorsey River Bend. Home Beautiful Park. Idlewild Improvement. Imperial Point.
Here.
Lake Ridge. Landings Residential Association. Lauderdale Beach HOA.
Here.
Lauderdale Harbors Improvement.
Here.
Lauderdale Isle Civic.
Here.
Here.
Lauderdale Manors HOA. Melrose Manors HOA.
Here.
Middle River Terrace.
Here.
Nurmi Isles HOA.
Here.
Poinciana Heights. Poinciana Park. Progresso Village.
Here.
Rio Vista here. River Garden Sweeting Estate. Riverland Preservation.
Here.
River Oaks.
Here.
Riverside Park. Rock Island.
Here.
Sailboat Bend.
Here.
Seven Isles Civic Association. Shady Banks.
Here.
Sunrise Intercoastal.
Present.
South Middle River.
Here.
Tarpon River.
Here.
Victoria Park. Okay, we have a quorum.
Fantastic.
I have one announcement related to membership. Just so everybody knows, we're approaching the time where everybody has to renew their memberships. We're having a new membership form that'll be posted on the website, and the main difference you're going to see on that membership form is there's a field on there that asks you, when did your board name your designated rep and your designated alt. This will help you make sure that your board has somebody who wants to be here and is attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. All right, so we're going to skip announcements for tonight. A motion to accept the minutes of the general meeting from December 10th.
Move the side second.
All right, Kelly moved. Okay, great. Treasurer's report.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay.
Treasurer's report. Okay, so we have $5,559.40 in our checking account with an outstanding check of $100. We have a little over $5,000 in the money market account, so your dollars are welcome. Please send your dues on time. And when do we have a due? We don't have a due date, but the sooner you send them, the easier it is for us to calculate what we have for the year. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay. A motion to approve treasurer's report?
We don't do that.
Okay, we don't do that.
Yeah,
No. How do I not remember that? All right, so I don't think we have police and fire here tonight, so we're going to go ahead. President's report, just briefly, there are a list of upcoming events. This is the time of year, so I've just listed the January and February that we're aware of. If you would like to volunteer, especially for the MLK Day events, you can contact the emails in the agenda, but we're also passing around a sign-up sheet So we're just going to pass that around. Also wanted to say welcome to the new faces in the room. New president of Tarpon River, welcome. Sailboat Bend, that's what I meant. Thank you very much. We've got a packed agenda tonight, so 5 presenters, and we'd like to be in and out of this room within a kind of a 2-hour time frame. So what we're going to try to do, especially because the first topic is of significant interest, it's ongoing interest, it's a significant issue, is we're going to try to limit this first part, the conversation about sewer, main repairs, and environmental services, to 30 minutes tops. 20 minutes for Chris and representatives from Cliff Berry to speak, and then 10 minutes for Q&A. We ask that questions that have not been submitted ahead of time, we did get submissions from an individual, but if you would like to ask a question, we're passing out pads for you to write your questions down, and we can handle it that way. With that, I'd like to bring up our city manager, Chris Lagerbloom, who was also interviewed on WLRN yesterday, did a fantastic job, so everybody should...
That thing was going to be 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
20 minutes later. It was one of those opportunities where we heard Mayor Trentalis say last week, well, let's just listen to it again. And all of a sudden I hear the mayor speak and then asked to react to that. That's always a fun spot to be. And so good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? Good. So we really said and kind of talked this message last week multiple times. I'll hit the very high points today because I'm guessing many of you have been in meetings where we have talked about number one, what has happened, number two, our response to it. And then I'll try to bring you current as to make a couple of changes since the end of last week and progress made early this week. So, and then if you'll indulge me just for a second, I'd like to talk about an early on piece of legislation that I think we need to be watching as a city. Even though the first day was today of the session, even yesterday I started to worry about what Tallahassee might do to us this spring. So, talking quickly about our sewer system, since we don't have to necessarily rehash all of the different breaks in the pipes that we've heard, what I can tell you is that we are actively installing a new pipe in Victoria Park. They're making progress every day. They actually made so much progress last week they had to stop on Saturday and Sunday because every piece of pipe we could get into the city they had in the ground. And that was a good spot to be. So I started again Monday morning to continue that pipe on 5th Street. And we went door to door today with some flyers in the neighborhood, letting people know sort of where we think we will progress with that project. We intend on being out of the neighborhood with restoration complete by February the 25th. So that project is moving exceptionally fast. Progress in Rio Vista, that pipe is on order, is manufactured, I believe, mostly in the state of Alabama. And we now have been notified of delivery. Like that smile, Alabama.
Scared me, but...
My favorite Georgia joke is the best thing that came out of Alabama was I-20.
Oh my God.
When you're a Georgia guy, you can say that and sort of get away with it. But that pipe is due to arrive here on February 15th. February 15th, we've been notified as the date that the Rio Vista pipe will physically get to Fort Lauderdale. The thing I don't want to have happen is I don't want to have pipe show up in Fort Lauderdale and it sit on the ground waiting on us to make progress to get it underground. And so between now and February 15th, the contractor that's working on that initial replacement pipe will be boring the hole that is necessary to pull the pipe through, so that as the pipe shows up, it can go immediately in the ground and we can get cut back over onto a regular sewer pipe. So if you start to see digging go on in Rio Vista, if you live there and you wonder, gosh, they're digging and there's no pipe, that's by design, so that when the pipe gets here, it doesn't have to sit and wait around. We did visit with the Army Corps of Engineers last week up in their Palm Beach Gardens office, and had very good reception with them, and explained to them our issues, and we're able to take about a 7-month process and whittle it down to 2 days. And so that has been very, very helpful. That will allow us to go under the river on 9th Avenue in Rio Vista. Now, they're requiring that we go under the river by 6 feet and 50 feet on each side of the bank, just to give you some idea of proximity. So we think that the pit to pit will be much further than 50 feet from the edge of the bank, so we don't think that any of those requirements are going to be problematic for us to comply with. And we'll get a regional permit and be able to go right to work getting that pipe under the river. We re-added some aeration to the Tarpon River. We've been monitoring oxygen levels They've been rebounding, but haven't been rebounding as quick as we had hoped, so we're trying to help that along with some mechanical aeration and adding of oxygen to that water body. Once we're done with all the repairs, I've said this last week and I'll say it again, we likely utilize some type of an environmental consultant to do an assessment of the Tarpon River and make a recommendation to us, and as I've said all along, if it's recommended, we'll do it. And so I don't know what that is yet, so I can't sit here and tell you I think the it is it. But if there's an environmental recommendation to bring the Tarpon River back to a better health than it is today, we will do it. Questions?
We've asked for questions to be written down.
You've asked them, okay. So that's sort of an update from last week, and we'll see what the questions are, then maybe I'll move to a little bit of legislation.
Okay, fantastic. And I don't know if we want to introduce John and just,
No, because I get really short if he stands up. And I don't get short in many circumstances. Yes, yes. Let's introduce John. See what I said? See what I mean? Look at this. I just got short.
Small guns. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you?
Yeah, so John works for CBI, which is the environmental firm that we have contracted with to do environmental remediation, both on an emergency, quick response basis and then on an ongoing basis in the neighborhoods that have been impacted by these sewer breaks. So we invite him here tonight to, if you have any technical questions on the types of treatment that they do, the types of materials and chemicals that they use, how they go through this process, and then any other questions you might have of how they responded to the initial emergency and what they do. He's certainly here for that. So you want to give a quick overview and then we'll see what questions happen?
maybe just a general overview of CBI first.
Yeah, that's what I was planning
Cool.
on doing.
All right.
So, good afternoon. My name is John Hines. I'm the South Florida Regional Manager for Cliff Ferry Incorporated, CBI. We're a statewide organization. 60 years in business this year. Founder Cliff Ferry Sr. Founded the company working in Port Everglades for the oil terminals. Was one of the primary offloading facilities for all the fuel terminals and tankers that came in, and got involved in environmental many years ago. We own one of the largest pre-treatment facilities in the southeast U.S. in Miami, where we pre-treat waste oils. We're the largest waste oil collector. We service all the major oil companies, municipalities for their oily waste and different particulars there. One of our things is an emergency responder, not only for all the oil companies, but we do other things as well. The city reached out to us on December 10th when this occurred. Once they were able to get everything under control, we came in to help start doing disinfecting and cleaning and remediation of the site. So, yeah, we've been doing it every day, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, around the clock as much as we can to not disturb the homeowners, and working with them closely on getting everything remediated and properly transported and disposed of and disinfected and cleaned. So, any questions?
We've got some that have been submitted, so let's take those and then we'll see where we go.
Just, I mean, I don't know
I'm having a
that,
hard time reading this first one.
I know.
So
Well,
I think it says parameters for public parks,
yeah.
but maybe it's a partner question to the one that is asked the question of any of these money for repairs is coming out of the parks bond or the police bond, and I'll give you a very straightforward answer there because it's very easy, no. It would be illegal to take any of those monies that were part of a referendum that identified certain projects and move them to infrastructure projects. So we can't take parks bond money and move them to infrastructure projects, nor can we take the police bond money and move them to infrastructure projects. So very easy to answer that question. I will highlight today, though, which is a really great thing for our city, that our bond rating increased as a result of 2 rating agencies coming last month. Yes, it's excellent. It will allow us to borrow at a much better rate. At this point, S&P has us rated as a AAA organization, which is as high a rating as you can get with S&P. And Moody's changed our bond rating from being stable to being positive. And that's another move in the right direction. So what that says is that there's an independent group that can come in and do an assessment of our financial abilities, our financial management, our abilities to pay back debt that's issued, and believe that we're in a strong position. So,
Mr. Lagerbloom, please, what I meant by that question is,
Sir, I'm sorry, you're following up on one of the questions you wrote down?
yes,
is that
Okay.
your question at the top? I just can't read.
yes.
Okay. Go for it.
My question was, We in Harbor Inlet were promised a park that was coming to us. It was very ambiguous as to what the parameters were for accepting or receiving that park. And we had a bit of a internal conflict within our neighborhood. I came to a meeting with Mr. Sorensen. I said, what is the requisite to accept a park? Is it 50%, 70%, 80%? What do you need to grant a neighborhood a park? Because this whole concept of Mayor Dean of parks going into the neighborhood, I fully support. And I would have loved to see one come into Harbor Inlet. But he couldn't specify, and there was some give and take between our president of the homeowners association and our neighborhood, and in the end, they said unless he saw a tremendous amount of support for a park, we wouldn't get it. In the end, we didn't get it. And I just put it the different
I think
neighborhoods.
I can answer your question very quickly.
The one park. You've got to give them some parameters, what is necessary.
Okay, so let me see if I can take this.
So just to clarify, this is not related to the current topic?
Correct.
So you're going to address it
30
anyway?
seconds,
Yep.
I can address it?
Yeah.
No problem. When we look at parks in neighborhoods, we look towards the policy that the commission has set, which says that there should be a park within 10 minutes of a walk from any place in Fort Lauderdale. That helps us geographically determine the locations. Then we look towards available land and need in a community, and ultimately take any proposal before the Parks, Rec and Beaches Advisory Board, who then makes a recommendation to the City Commission, who ultimately will decide if we purchase land or don't purchase land for the purpose of the park. So, multi-step process, a lot of people weigh in along the way.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, how will the pipe go over under Southeast 9th Avenue Bridge at Ponce? The intent is for it to go under, as I described, 6 feet under the base of the river, and 50 feet beyond from each bank is where we will have to dig a pit to be able to put the pipe under. The pipe is so large, though, that pit-to-pit distance is probably a good 1,500 feet. So we really have no problem getting to 50 feet when you have to have them that far apart to be able to get the slope right to get a pipe that size underground, so you can't do this with it. You got to come at some level of an angle. What about future taxes raises? Yeah, we'll have that discussion at a different day. That's obviously something for the commission to weigh in on. I don't have any intent at this point on making a recommendation for a millage rate increase. I haven't built next year's budget. We held it solid for the last year, but we will obviously make that recommendation to the commission at some point. But to this point, everything that we funded within the current millage rate that's assessed. Water drinking quality, when is it tested, by whom, and the results? We contract drinking water. Drinking water is tested in our lab every day, and we send those tests out. They incubate for a period of 24 hours. They come back. There's all scientists we literally have 3 functioning laboratories at our water plant with scientists in them that are staffed around the clock doing water testing. We submit those results to the Department of Health. And we do publish a drinking water report on our website if you want to get yourself caught up on that.
Can I jump in on one?
Excuse me, where on the,
I'm sorry, we're asking everyone to write down their questions ahead of time?
what you said.
So if you go to our website, fortlauderdale.gov, and go water testing results, or some in the search engine, just pick something along that string.
Sorry, I just couldn't hear that.
I went to a page and we have they're all stacked up one after one, with links to them on that one page. So water test results, drinking water tests, any of those. I think I just answered Susie's question. I think we're good. Hang on, let me get to the ones that are written, and then I'll see if they let me go off script, which I'm sure they will.
That was my question. Are the drinking water pipes in danger of rupturing?
Not at all.
They're
2 totally different systems. Totally different systems, not commingled at all.
okay. Thank you.
Water quality report, I think I just answered that. Is there a
No,
written?
that's my question.
That's your question. Okay, good.
It's the actual water quality in the canals and the...
Okay, so we contract out, other than when we have a spill and we're sampling for the purposes of doing the reporting that we have to do, we contract out to Broward County. to perform that testing for us. And there's various points throughout Fort Lauderdale that are tested on various schedules based upon...
Because I've been looking to find it, I can't find it.
So I think Dr. Gaspin sent an email that pointed to the map of where the sampling locations are, and I didn't look at it any more than that, I hate to admit, but...
That is, after you get a negative, you don't test it.
No, that's not the... That is a true statement with respect to the spill. Once we get consecutive passing tests, then DEP says there is no need to continue sampling. But we do periodic, regular samples at assorted places throughout the city. We just contract with the county to do those. And those are regular, but they're like once a month, once every other month, once every 6 months. People smarter than me pick how often to do it based upon the environmental conditions, but I'll see if I can get a link to the county's page where those results will be captured. Okay? So a written plan for sewer line replacement and funding. Did I get that close? So I think that's what it says. The answer to the question is yes, it exists in our capital plan. It is the culmination of the report that we did, the comprehensive utility master plan that translates into our CIP. You can go to our CIP and find what the plan is for the next 5 years. You'll find that also coincides with the work that is required as a part of the consent order that we have with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So you're going to find a lot of similarities between the capital plan and the projects and plan that's required with the consent order. So that would be the place to go look for that. How do you respond to those who want a pause on development in order to do work necessary, age or capacity issue? So I respond to that in a very different way maybe than the elected officials would respond to that. I look at that as whether or not development happens as a policy decision of the city, which means I look to the city commission to make that policy decision. What I can tell them with a very straight face is that if they're looking at our plant and looking at our pipes, looking at our system, we have volume and capacity in all of those things to support the development that they either choose to approve or not. And so I look at it from a perspective of, can we serve it if it's built? Anything that we send to the commission, we have done an evaluation of and have determined that we can serve it if it is built. And if you go to the backup in the commission agenda items, you will see the capacity analysis that we do. It's about a 6 or 7 page document, and it will accompany every development project that is proposed. It'll either say one or two things. It's either going to say that there's sufficient capacity, or it's going to say there's not sufficient capacity. In order to gain capacity, you as the developer need to do X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z can be any number of things. It could be adding larger pipes. It could be adding larger pumps. It could be adding larger wet wells in the pump stations. There is ways to increase the volume of our system, and volume exists to get the wastewater from the source to the plant. Once it gets to the plant, we have a permitted capacity at the plant that we can treat on a 1 million gallons per day basis, and we do not push that maximum on any regular basis. Occasionally when we have a heavy rain, we'll get close to it because of the I&I we're trying to avoid. But on a dry day, we treat somewhere in the 30 to 35 million gallons of wastewater a day, and we're permitted almost 56. All right, with today's announcement of the new... How'd you not get any questions?
I did.
Oh, you're still getting one.
You want to jump in if you want me to jump in.
I'm like, I need a drink.
I like this
water.
one here that says, "Thank you from the Rio Vista residents."
There you go.
That is much appreciated. On behalf of Cliff Barry, thank you.
Bring that one.
With today's announcement of the new development at Searstown, what do you say to residents who do not want new development until the sewers are fixed? I would say the same thing I just told you, that we have not evaluated that project for capacity at this point. I think it was just a DRC today, which is the very early on starting of a technical review of a project. And there'll be lots, I can assure you along the way, there'll be a lot of scrutiny on our capacity and volume as it relates to that project as it, oh, I got a Diet Coke, but you're so sweet, thank you.
Sweet.
Thank you. It was my Georgia coming out again. Bless her heart.
I like it.
Bill's got a question.
Concerning all
Are we taking
the,
questions, or do you not want, no?
Dr. Getz, you sent in a list of questions prior. Did Chris address the questions that you submitted?
no,
Okay.
I know I provided one pretty lengthy response to,
yeah, that was some previous.
those were questions before the follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take a look at them tomorrow, and if they're in my inbox, I'll happy to respond. Unless you want to take them tonight,
No.
I do want to talk about this one piece of legislation, because I think it's important, so.
Any other input from Cliff-Berry? John Hines?
Yeah, if I could help. The one question was, how do we determine whether the remediation is complete in Rio Vista? Well, we don't want to just focus on Rio Vista. We want to focus on anywhere that there's been, a release of wastewater. So when the initial, incident occurs, we come out and we're reviewing and taking photos along with city risk and looking at the impact to all the properties. What's been impacted, how it's been impacted, and to the extent, right? So if it's just lawns and driveways and the streets, from the sidewalk to the sidewalk, we're working with the city directly on getting that immediately done. If it's gone beyond that and we have to reach out to the homeowners, the city is working on that as well and bringing that information to us and giving us an allowance to be able to go onto the properties and remove and disinfect and clean anything that had been impacted. Vehicles, driveways, mulch, rock, sod, your grass, to make sure that anything that is kind of on the top surface is rectified. We remove that, remove all those contaminants and disinfect them. Just like a septic system, it goes into the ground eventually, right? There is a little bit of chemical, but we don't want that. We want to go ahead and clean it, remove that top layer of grass and anything that might have gone down the drain that's kind of laying on the surface. We want to get that removed and cleaned up and restored back to the way it was prior to the incident. And that's where we come in to help out and get that completed. Some of you may have been through the Rio Vista and the Victoria Park neighborhoods where these incidents occurred and seen what we've been doing. So we scrape that up, we remove it, treat it with hydrated lime, different chemicals to be able to kill the bacterias and let it percolate in, and then disinfectants such as household type bleach. We use a little more industrial, and then we cut it into liquid that kills the bacteria. So that's where we're at with that so far.
Might be a city question.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Before you move on, let me just say too, for those that are in the room wondering what question that at least I would ask when we engage somebody like a Cliff-Berry, is to, I ask our staff and say, well, how is this just not an open checkbook for the city to write checks for work that either needs to be done or may not need to be done, or who's going to make that determination? Because this isn't an open checkbook event. And so I want to let you all know that, yes, CBI is doing the work. We as a city, through our risk division, have each quote that is provided to us for work to be done independently evaluated by an auditor to make a determination as to whether or not, yes, that is work that should be done, or no, that's not work that needs to be done at this point. So there is a check and a balance to all of the quotes to make sure that we don't end up, it's public funds, and so we make sure that we make people whole, but that we're not rebuilding houses that don't need to be rebuilt. And so there's a fine line there.
And working with one contractor such as ourselves instead of 50 different contractors from 50 different people, as you can imagine on a claim like that, it would be 50 different prices. So we're on all the sides. So one of the questions, did we put back the grass, soil, and sod removed? Of course we did. And I'm not buying a pallet from Home Depot. We're buying it in truckloads, right? So we went and done bulk purchases. We've got many different quotes to make sure we're not using, the highest quote, the right quote. And again, like Chris mentioned, there's an audit process going on and tracking everything that we're doing so that we're making sure that we're staying on track for the funds that are being spent. But yes, we do put everything back. So if you had on our initial site assessment a photo of grass and red mulch and rock or whatever you had in your landscaping beds that was impacted from the release, then we go in and clean that up, remove it, properly transport it, profile it, and dispose of it. It's not just going to some yard somewhere, or some tree farm somewhere. It's going to our kill, waste management landfill, and all those manifests, which are legal shipping documents, are provided to the city for proper transportation and disposal of that by licensed waste haulers. And then we put it back, so it's nice and clean and fresh. Hopefully that answers your question there. But it's all photo documented before. Yeah.
The last question I got is, what's this cost us so far? We've started to, I can tell you what the replacement projects have cost because we've taken those to the commission with legitimate contracts to move forward. We're assembling invoices, and we're still still have, they're still rolling in. So the worst thing I can do, especially with Suzanne in the room, is give you a number and then it'd be wrong later. So her headline writers would love that. And I'm glad she's still smiling and typing. So, do you want to do Dr. Getz now, or do you want me to respond to him tomorrow? What do you?
He's going to respond to your questions.
Two questions for you, if I could.
I'm asking, and we're trying to honor this policy, if you don't mind.
Here.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Here's the written ones.
Oh, that's great. All right, perfect.
I'm concerned about all the bond money that we're going to be issuing over the next couple of years, and Marilyn, maybe you can help me with this. When we issued like $300 million for police and fire, or even for the sewer and stormwater, over the course of the 20 years, it essentially doubles the cost. So if we issue $300 million now, we end up paying $600 million, but we only get to spend $300 million on actual projects. Whereas if we raise the millage rate, for instance, say 2 points, we got $75 million to play with interest-free, and we wouldn't have to send it for future generations. I don't know how much in total bond money we're going to have to put out there, Marilyn. Maybe you can answer it for infrastructure going down, but it's going to be a lot. And anything that we can do now to decrease the interest by maybe raising the millage rate so we don't have to pay extra interest, I think would be a good idea.
So let me see if I can respond to that in a nice package summary here. We got good news today that says that we borrow money now at a better rate than we had yesterday. So that's a good thing. If we were to pursue a millage rate increase in the city, that impacts everybody who lives in Fort Lauderdale, who's a taxpayer in the city of Fort Lauderdale. When we deal with our utilities, when we deal with the water utility, with the wastewater utility, those are utilities in which we service customers outside of the city. We have customers in Oakland Park, Tamarack, Wilton Manors, Dania Beach in one circumstance, and Port Everglades in a different circumstance. And so when we look towards it being ratepayer backed and the debt being ratepayer backed, and Kyle, you can probably do a better job of this, you happen to be here, that if we issue that debt, then we share with those other ratepayers, those in Wilton Manors, Oakland Park, Dania Beach, Tamarack, the port, in the maintenance of the infrastructure in the ground. Whereas if we just raise the millage rate, everybody in Oakland Park, Wilton Manors, Dania Beach, and Tamarack, who we service, get a pass on maintaining the system because we don't give them a tax bill. And so if we want all of these repairs to fall only on those of us that live here, then a millage rate increase with then a subsidy to the utility would be a way to consider. But I just don't think that is the right thing to do to the 182,000 people that live here, especially because we have others that enjoy the use of the system. And so I think the better option going forward is to explore the debt that we could issue based upon the rate being paid. Of course, the commission could change their mind and say, we need a millage rate increase. That would be a matter of policy, but right now that wouldn't be a recommendation.
Okay, so one last question, and then that one's a thank you. So I'll read this.
Will you be doing any, or have you done an assessment cleanup of the Tarpon River, specifically in the western Tarpon River? CBI is not doing cleanup in the waterways, and so
we did some trash and things.
you had like the skimming boats out there, but as far as environmental type stuff,
No, other than some air sparging of the bottoms to churn it and introduce oxygen to it, just like at a wastewater treatment plant, to expedite bacterial growth for consumption. No other work has been done.
Will do.
yes, and as I've said before, I just don't know that that's CBI's work to do, but that'll be work that once we get the repairs made and bring in some environmental folks to do an environmental assessment, whatever that recommendation is, we have like 4 environmental consultants on standby that we can issue a task order to, so they're not hard for us to latch. I can't even talk tonight. Not hard for us to latch onto.
Wonderful. So we're gonna summarize this. It'll be on our website. There'll be opportunity to ask additional questions and follow up by submitting through the portal there. I'm just going to read the last question, which is really an acknowledgement. So in addition to CBI, Chris, please thank you, and to the city staff for all the hard work and all the hours, day and night, for the cleanup process and the significant effort.
Pass it along.
It's a wonderful team working on this. It's a difficult, great. And Cliff Berry as a partner is really wonderful, right in our backyard doing all the work in the port. So we really appreciate you coming in here tonight. I'm sure we'll be talking more about this as the time moves forward.
Thinking I may be a monthly return here.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to skip down to the last agenda item, which is the SDR legislation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
So
so let me just
is
throw
that-
this on your radar screen, just thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
All right, I got tall again. How about that? I didn't get skinny though, all of a sudden. I don't know what happened. So we're watching very early on, and I want everybody to watch with us, because every year we get a piece of legislation that is one that we focus in on. Last year was microtransit and the scooters, if you recall. I think this year we're probably in for the fight of the year with vacation rentals if we want to keep local control. I will tell you, introduced by Senator Diaz of Miami-Dade County into the Senate as Senate Bill 1128. It is the one to watch, at least early on this year. What it essentially seeks to do in its original drafting is to cause local governments not to be able to regulate vacation rentals and to repeal any ordinances that they've created dating back to pre-2014. So it not only has future consequences, but it has retroactive consequences that would say that any of the ordinances that our commission has put on the books to regulate short-term vacation rentals would be no longer valid. So this is early on in the process. It has a companion House bill at 1011, I believe. And it made it through its first committee stop, which is, I get I and I right with the sewer system. I get I and I wrong with the committees in Tallahassee. It is Innovation and Technology. It made its first committee stop there. It passed 8-2. Thankfully, Senator Brandis from Pinellas County and Senator, oh my God, he was just in my office, Farmer from Broward County were the two no votes. But it went through fairly easily. We have our lobbyists on it. I believe that I should say politics are at play, and I know we're in Tallahassee, so politics are at play. I think this is some legislation this year that's being pushed by potentially the incoming president of the Senate. We'll just have to watch that. We'll know what it does next. It goes into commerce and tourism is the next committee stop that it makes, so we'll watch and see what it does there. I'm sending folks to Tallahassee next week to start to walk the halls and meet with our delegation there early on in the session. I'll be going the week after that. Next week is Broward Days in Tallahassee. If you follow what that is, it's Broward Days. And sometimes when we show up in Tallahassee from Broward, we don't get all the meetings that we're looking for because we're not necessarily, the politics of South Florida don't necessarily match with Tallahassee in some circumstances. So I'm going to try to go up the following week when I think I can actually get some meetings scheduled one-on-one and start to do some of this talking. But these are all things to watch. You're going to see emails come out. Look at the people that are on these committees that these bills are being heard by. Send them real examples of what it means to live in a community that has a vacation rental. We live in paradise and people want to come here, and they open up hotels in our neighborhoods, and that's fine to the extent that they make compatible neighbors. But if they don't, then that's a difficult place to be. So I'm going to stop there tonight because I don't know any more than that, other than it's been introduced. Follow those numbers: 1128, 1011 in the House, HB 1011, Senate Bill 1128. And if you take a look at any of the committees that it's going to go to, and you know anybody on there, or just feel like sending emails saying, "My God, guys and gals, what are you thinking?" That would be wise. And we're going to do the same thing on your behalf, both through our lobbyists and personally.
We'll take action on that, for sure.
Good.
We voted against it last year. We'll vote against it again this year.
It's far more damning this year than it's ever been to local control, to home rule. And so it's never gone so far as to retroactively repeal existing laws, and that's the difference this year than it's been in previous years. So, did I miss anything, Marilyn?
No, I think you have summed it up very nicely. I think we can make sure that on our webpage there are those links that Commissioner Sorensen and Commissioner Glassman sent out emails about. Those links are very important. You can actually watch the hearings and see what the politics are and who's pushing for it and who's not. It's very, very interesting.
And drop a note to Senator Farmer and tell him thank you.
Yes.
I mean,
Thanks, Senator
he was in
Farmer.
a very strong voting minority in the first committee stop, but he represents a good portion of Fort Lauderdale, and he protected he voted which would protect our interest. And so, for that, it's worth a quick little line of thank you. So, all right, y'all. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Okay, sounds good.
So, next topic on the agenda, we're moving along here. Marilyn is going to help kind of introduce this section. Just to clarify, sewer main repair and stormwater, two different things. So tonight's presentation is about the stormwater rate adjustments that are being proposed. We're going to need to move on this. It's another large infrastructure issue. Marilyn is much more articulate about this, and she will introduce our presenter, Kyle, from Stantec.
Very quickly. As you know, I'm your representative on the Infrastructure Task Force. And the one thing I have learned in the 3 years that I've been doing this is that infrastructure is like a 3D chess game, okay? You're working over here on sanitary sewers, but over here you have the stormwater sewers, and over here you have the water system, and over here you have the bridges, and everything is at play at the same time, which makes it very difficult, complicated, but you have to be able to compartmentalize. So tonight we heard a lot in Chris's presentation about the sanitary sewers. And we're all very, anxious about the sanitary sewer system and what's going on there. But now we have to pivot. We have to make a real pivot and go back to stormwater systems, which are completely different from the sanitary sewers. And to your question about the money and where's the money coming from and how much money is involved, the answer is it's a lot of money. And we did talk a little bit about where the money comes from, taxes versus fees, and we can have that discussion even in more depth if you would like, but not tonight. Tonight we have to focus on the sanitary, see, I got it confused already, on the stormwater system. And the reason we have to focus on it is because action has to be taken at the commission, maybe in the next meeting or the meeting after that, to determine how we're going to pay for the next tranche of bonds, how we're going to finance the system for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So Kyle is representative of the consultants that the city has hired, and they've been working on this for quite some time. It's not just, they do this on a regular basis, reviewing the rates, reviewing if we have enough money, how do we adjust, et cetera, et cetera. And he's going to present to you tonight what's called the hybrid system. So the hybrid system is something that was proposed by the Infrastructure Task Force. Actually, we didn't propose it, we supported it wholeheartedly, and we asked the Commission to consider switching from the current system of setting the rates to this hybrid system, which involves a different methodology. And that's what he's going to explain to you tonight, and how that actually will affect the rates going forward. Kyle.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Good evening. Great to be here this evening. Again, my name's Kyle Stevens, and I've done a number of different financial planning activities for the city over the last 5 years. Tonight, what I want to talk about is the stormwater rate study. And this has really been under development for a number of years, but it's hitting a critical leg here as we move into 2020. For tonight's presentation, to meet time, I'm going to skip a few slides, but I want to really hit the big points as I go through here. So I'm going to talk about the big critical decision points that were arrived at during the study. As far as the study goes, there's a number of components of a rate study. Starting on the left here, real simply, revenue requirement. That is simply an analysis of how much money do we need for the next 10 years in each and every year to run the system sustainably. Cost allocation, that's where we're trying to figure out what to measure to understand a parcel's impact on the stormwater system. How do they generate stormwater? How do we provide service to them? And then it'll be the fee structure. How do we design those? Marilyn alluded to the hybrid structure, so we'll talk about what goes into that. And then the method of billing. How do we get you a bill that you pay for services? And so I'll jump right into it. One thing I want to just hit on, like I mentioned, this has been under development for a number of years, going back to actually 2016, when we were initially asked to look at and come up with innovative ideas to fund stormwater infrastructure improvements. We have made a number of presentations to the Fort Lauderdale Infrastructure Task Force, as well as the BAB, the Budget Advisory Board, and got approval to move from those committees, votes from those committees for the hybrid structure to the City Commission. And we've moved into 18 to look at that hybrid structure, and now we've come up with those results and the impacts to parcels that we'll talk about today. So the first part, the revenue requirement, what I've got on this slide right here is essentially what the ratepayers pay right now funds. So right now, on a monthly basis, a parcel or a utility account in the city will get a water bill, a sanitary sewer bill, and a stormwater bill monthly. Currently, your stormwater bill funds operations and maintenance, so that's keeping the pipes clear and efficient and cleaning the system out. There is some capital, mainly renewal and replacement items that are funded in there as well. It's about $4 million a year. And then this is the big one. And so the city's been very proactive. They've done a stormwater master plan to identify the different drainage basins within the city and the projects that need to be accomplished in those basins in order to bring the level of service up to protect the private property from flooding. And within that first phase of the master plan, $200 million of projects have been identified. I've listed down here the neighborhoods that would be affected. There are 7 neighborhoods in that first phase of the project. There is a number of others that would be behind this first phase, but what we're looking at is $200 million, and currently the rate cannot fund that. And so with this revenue sufficient, what we want to understand is how much money do we need to get each year in order to sustainably run the system as well as fund all of the needs. And so what we do for the city, and this is a dashboard of a financial model that we put together, we gather all of the budget data, the capital data, the financial policies, put that into a projection model so that we can look at different scenarios to try to figure out the different levers that are in play here. So what I've got up here right now is a diagnostic scenario. So what I've done is I've kept the current revenue level steady, but I brought in these capital projects. And so over here is $200 million split between 2020 and 2021. We have chosen in this scenario to debt finance those. And the reason behind that is because when we have capital projects of this magnitude, we're making a generational investment in the system. We're putting assets in place that are not only going to be in place next year and the year after that, but likely for 30, 40, 50 years. And so by debt financing, though, it spreads out the payment for those assets that we're investing in over time, so then a generation of ratepayers will be paying back for it that receive the benefit of it. What we can see in this first scenario is with that debt financing, if we go ahead and do that, but we don't raise rates, it's unsustainable. So we could not go to the market and borrow this money. They would look at us and say, you don't have the financial stability to be able to do that. The reason behind that, very much like your own personal bank account, is shown here in this middle graphic. So I've got it here in the orange. This is the cash out, the expenses of the utility. In black is the cash in, it's not changing. There's a gap between the two, which means we're spending more than we're bringing in. And much like your personal bank account, you can do that for a little bit if you have some balances. But if we don't have any additional income, we use all of it up, and we go below zero. So what would fix the situation to allow us in order to do these investments? This particular graphic shows a 54% increase in revenue in FY21. So when we do that bond, and we need to pay that debt service associated with it, that would mean we would need to raise the revenues that go into this utility by 54%. And that would allow us to have proper coverage on the debt. And now you can see in this middle graphic, when we look there, those lines are balanced. The cash in, the cash out are on top of each other. So that's a sustainable plan on a go-forward basis. The next question would be, how do we go to collect that money, or how do we measure a parcel's impact on the stormwater system? And what I've put over here to the left is a number of different units of measurements or yardsticks that communities will use. And I've labeled these really in terms of increasing equity. And so for systems that are not all that mature, oftentimes it'll be right in the general fund. Your general taxes will pay for stormwater. But you can imagine a very valuable home would pay a lot more than another one. It's not a good nexus between the use of the stormwater system. So what we'll do next is use dwelling units potentially to size it for difference in the sizes of properties. The city currently does that for single-family residential parcels. So they use dwelling units. gross area, simply the area contained within the parcel line. So now we're starting to talk about scaling of the parcel in relation to how much stormwater it can generate. Pervious area, so that's area that can allow percolation of water or natural percolation, and then impervious area, and that is considered in our industry really the gold standard. So if you think about pre-development, post-development, it's really impervious area that's going to change the magnitude of runoff coming off of that. So if there was an open field that goes to a parking lot, that's a lot more stormwater that the city system has to receive and then treat. But in the city of Fort Lauderdale, we also have a unique circumstance, and so these are some local pictures. You've essentially got, when we talked to the people that know the system best and the residents, what we found out is a couple things. First of all, the streets are the first place that floods. It's the lowest elevation typically in most neighborhoods, and so we'll start to see the flooding there, which means the city's stormwater system, to a large degree, is set up to prevent roadway flooding. Additionally, you have the dynamic of sunny day flooding, where we have king tides that will come up, back up the stormwater system, and then come up on the street. So that's another dynamic that, again, impacts this roadway network. And so one thing we brought to the table, it hasn't necessarily been done that much in the U.S. We've done 2 examples in other communities, but it's trip generation rates as a nexus to possibly assign the cost to different parcels. And what this does is it says one of the key benefits is keeping roads clear and passable of your stormwater system. So we should look at how different parcels are using the roadway network and deriving benefit of clear and passable roads. What are trip generation rates? I've just got a quick example of this. For a single family home, on an average daily basis, they would generate about 9.4 trips per day, and that kind of includes, going to the home, it includes the occupancy as well as other trips to the home. But this also allows us to look at non-residential use. So a gas station, we can look at the square footage of it, roughly 845 trips per 1,000 square feet. So different land uses can be compared next to each other to figure out their different beneficial use of the roadway network. Supermarkets, for every 1,000 square feet, it's about 106 trips per day. And so what we did is we looked at every single parcel within the city, and this data comes directly from ITE, which is the engineering association related to trips. They do, information is widely used for transportation impact fees. So what we did, you heard mention the hybrid model. What we did is we went through a number of iterations, and the one thing the commission asked me to look at is essentially breaking the fee that any parcel would receive into 2 parts. One would be the conventional approach, which is currently in place, and I'll talk about exactly how that works right now. And the other is the trip generation rate. So we would essentially collect part of the money we need to run the system on both sides of this equation and generate a hybrid fee for each and every parcel. The real question is, how do we split that cost? So we know the cost needs to go up by 54%. How much do we collect on each side of this hybrid structure? Went through an analysis. I'll go to the next slide real quick. They basically looked at every single department within the city's stormwater utility, how they service the difference between quality and quantity. Those are the 2 things we're really managing in stormwater. What we found is in the city of Fort Lauderdale, roughly 80% is quantity related, dealing with the amount of runoff. 20% currently of activities are related to quality. That gave us an ability to attach costs to those 2. And so what we're going to do is split the total cost, which is roughly $31.3 million this next fiscal year, 80% to the current structure that's in place, and then split the rest of it over to trip generation. So how does the current structure work? So the current structure, got $25 million to recover on that. If you're single family, it's based on dwelling units. If it's going to be any other kind of improved parcel, it's a fee based on the acreage, the gross area of the parcel. And then there's a differentiation given for vacant parcels because there's no improvement on there. There still is stormwater management activities, but it's a lower fee. So what we would do is have part of the bill on the current structure, and then this would be the new part of the hybrid, which is trip generation. So this is 20% of the cost. It comes out roughly, if I look at all the trips in the city, to roughly $417 per trip. And then what we're going to do is essentially there's 63 or so categories, different land use categories for trip generation. Look at each parcel individually, come up with its trip generation, multiply it by this rate to give us a blended fee that will be individual for each and every parcel depending on how they're charged currently and how they'll be charged under trips. And so what I'd like to do is just the next few slides have the bill impacts, and a lot of times that's what we care about is how does the rubber meet the road. And so I'll go through these. This is an example of a single family home. So I mentioned we need to collect a lot more revenue in order to fund these improvements, but how we collect it, because of the trip generation component, it's going to redirect some of that money to some parcels that benefit greatly from the clear and passable roads. So I'm going to stand on this column over here. This is a current right now. It's about $14 a month for a single family home that has one dwelling unit. That calculated is $21.53. So that's the increase that we would be looking at if this was approved. And I'll give a caveat as we go through this. The numbers here are draft. There are a few things that would change depending on the exact debt issuance and interest rate. So that'd be about a $7.53 increase. How does that stack up? So what I did here is I grabbed some of the largest stormwater utilities within the state and put in their monthly rate. You can see currently the city of Fort Lauderdale here at $14. If we were to move to the rate that's in this presentation, that would move it up to the second highest under Miami Beach. Now the one distinction I need to make when we do these comparisons is every community will have a different level of service that's involved in their community. Additionally, when we look at this, oftentimes what we'll notice is the ones off to the right are very similar to you. They're coastal communities that are dealing with issues that you're dealing with. And so what we see is those rates tend to cluster. Some of the other ones may be or inland or have a different dynamic. Also, I've been doing a lot of this work over the last few years. What we have seen is these rates, much like yours, will stay steady at a lower rate. And then when we get a master plan or we get an analysis, they make big jumps. And so we've seen a lot of pressure on these rates over the last few years, and we expect that in the future we'll see many of these coming up. If we take some other non-single family examples, condos. So condos are a really interesting one. This city of Fort Lauderdale has a number of vertical developments, and currently for condos, because your bill is on the utility bill, it's typically a single bill to the overall premises because they'll have one water meter. And so they'll get one stormwater bill, and you will pay through that typically through your HOA fees in most situations. When we talk about the collection method that's recommended under this, the one change that we're looking at potentially is shifting the payment off of the utility bill to the ad valorem tax bill, which would mean that the payment would go directly to parcel owners or condo or owners directly and would come off of that utility bill. If I look at this, what I've done here is estimated for a typical condo, and it will change depending on the exact dynamics of the development. So in this example, on a per unit basis, again, they pay a total bill, but on a per unit basis, it's about $3.55. Under the calculated here, it'd be $6.31 or $2.77. And the reason for that increase and why it's a little bit larger is because with trips, it's picking up some of that vertical development and the benefit that those individual living units receive of the clear and passable roads. If I go on to another example, here's an institutional example. Their current bill is about $119 a month. Move up to $210.50, $91 increase there on a monthly basis. And they've got a very similar breakdown here in this bar between current and the trip generation. Now, this example is commercial, this last one, and this one is going to be important because before I go to the rate, one of the things I want you to notice is this bar right here, which is a proportion of the bill. So what we're seeing in the commercial when we start to bring trips into the conversation and the benefit that parcels receive is that commercial parcels, by and large, through trip generation rates, receive a lot of benefit of having those roads clear and passable. And so in this particular example, we've got a large supermarket. It's $267 a month currently. That bill on a go-forward basis calculated here would be $1,875, about a $1,600 increase. Steps to finalize fees. Again, the two caveats I wanted to mention is we still have a few items that will change that will ultimately result in the final fees, including the coverage targets and the exact debt service and the final parcel roll. The last thing I will mention is just the method of collection. I touched on that for a second. Here's some pros and cons. And in the industry, there's basically, as I mentioned, two ways to collect these fees. One would be on the utility bill, it's monthly. There are a number of issues with that that have come up that have had the industry moving to the non-ad valorem special assessment process. And the main one is it's really hard to attach the parcel database back to the utility database to bill it and keep that fresh. Because you can imagine in many circumstances, especially in a city such as yours, you will have one utility account potentially serving multiple parcels, and they can subdivide over time or change, and keeping that data fresh and that relationship strong is really hard. It's a very large administrative task. Additionally, one of the other ones that I'll mention is if you don't have a utility billing account, you may not be paying stormwater bills. The city does currently go and try to send you a bill annually, but one thing, if you have a non-ad valorem assessment, we make sure everyone's paying because we use the updated parcel database. And so that's the recommended database. And with that, I'll go to the end if there's any questions.
So what are the next steps for the city? Where do we go from here?
Yep, so this year I have presented this to the commission back in November. I made another, I should go back. So I made that presentation, and at the end of that presentation, they wanted me to re-engage the community. So we went back to the infrastructure task force. We are here tonight to present, and then I will be going back to the commission on the 4th of February. For an update to give them feedback and get their direction on a go-forward basis.
So we didn't mention this, but this is indicated as a voting item tonight. So we want to talk about it, right? Ask questions. You can clearly see the impact is on the commercial side in terms of the overall increase. Individual homeowners and condo, less of an increase, but still an increase. You had a question? Yes.
I'm curious to know how you define condo. In your graphic, a condo was a high-rise, but in fact, condoized properties are only about 35 to 40% of the condo units in the city.
Yes.
So there's townhouses, low-rises, etc. Are they all condos?
I'm using the property appraiser's definition. So if they labeled it in the taxable value information, the tax ID as a condo, that's what I'm using as a condo.
But trips are not the same in a high-rise as they are in a townhouse.
No, they're not. No, so in a condo, they're actually... Yeah, it is. So in a high-rise condo, they're actually lower than what we see in single-family homes or even townhomes.
What is that?
Okay, so there was a hand raised in the back. I don't think it was Melinda. Was there anyone else in the back that had their hand raised? No, it wasn't Dr. Getz. Okay, so Melinda, Bill, and then Dr. Getz.
Thanks for the presentation. I did just want to check, because there was an article in the Sun Sentinel that came out, you probably read it, December 17, regarding this issue, and it actually gave some percentages, and I just want to confirm that these are in the kind of right range. So the increase in that article stated for single-family homeowner, the increase would be about 34%. But if you compare that with a homeowner in, say, a 370 unit condo, it would be 122%. And like you said, for the condo owner, that would be actually added eventually to the property tax bill. I just wanted to know if those percentages that the Sun Sentinel, I think Stanley's colleague Larry mentioned, are in the right range.
So order of magnitude, absolutely. As I mentioned, some of the fees have changed a little bit as we update some of the final numbers as we go into the finalization process. But order of magnitude, you're absolutely dead on. So what we see is, in those cases, when we take into account trips, it starts to recognize the vertical development, the benefit of those free and passable roads to the dwelling units above. And so what you will see in those cases is larger increases in the fee to recognize that benefit.
Bill? I think you were next. Yes. John, sorry, John.
If the 200 million that you're trying to raise is good for the 7 neighborhoods, how much more money do we have to raise for all the other neighborhoods? And how will this rate structure support the future beyond these 7 neighborhoods?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've talked about tonight, the revenue increase and the rates, are fundamentally to address that first tranche of $200 million. They additionally recognize some of the equity dynamics, so we're changing a little bit how we recover money. But in the future, we have in our financial model projected about every 5 years in the near term to do another $200 million or so. Those numbers would have to be trued up when we get to there in time. The rates would have to come up again in order to support that debt service.
So can I ask one follow-up question? You said we're kind of in the middle of cities that are close on the coast and in the
Yes.
near water, but yet you have Hollywood that was paying 5 bucks. Jacksonville was on the very low. So how does that jive in terms of Fort Lauderdale? Because there's just as much water as we are.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's one of the fundamental questions when you pull that up, right, is that contrast back and forth. So without a super detailed analysis, some of the things that come to mind right away are funding sources. Is the enterprise fully self-sustaining? So what we're talking about here is essentially rates paying for all of the stormwater activities that need to happen. What we find in other communities when we dive into the numbers, that sometimes often isn't true. They'll have other funding sources supporting stormwater. That could be the general fund in some cases, so it's not fully self-sustaining. So that's some of the difference you see. Grants in some instances can come up as well for projects. And as I mentioned, one of the big things is the like me is just haven't addressed this yet. It's one of the things that's on the table. Stormwater is not sexy. And so it's going to be pushed out oftentimes into the future until it's a critical need. And then action will occur, and what we'll see is large step-ups in the rate. So we won't see a glide path. We'll see a fundamental readjustment. And so those are some of the dynamics that we see.
Dr. Getz and the lady from, I don't know your name, after? Juanita. So Dr. Getz, Juanita, and then we're going to have to shut it down. Melinda, you've asked a question. Anyone that hasn't asked a question, gentleman in the back, and then you'll be the last one, okay? And then we're going to have Marilyn wrap this up. So Dr. Getz.
I think you estimated that over 20 years, there would be something like a requirement for $1 billion, $1.2 billion, or something in bonds that needed to be issued to keep us up to date. I'm curious how you arrived at that figure and whether it took into account the probability of how extreme storms would interact to throw that out of whack.
So I believe the $1 billion, if I'm thinking about that number correctly and the way you're mentioning it, is on the water and sewer side. Is stormwater, I don't believe I've mentioned that. Stormwater, the only thing we've talked about is essentially 2 tranches of 200 million, so 400 million in total. The last 200 though, I have to say is a planning number. We think, in that time frame, we're going to have to issue debt again to do the next phase of projects, but that's all we've discussed on stormwater.
Juanita?
Yeah, some of my information was given, when you mentioned about the 7 neighborhoods. Who were the seven neighborhoods?
So back right up here, about the 7 neighborhoods that were listed in the first phase.
Was that the question, Juanita?
Yes, that was the question.
Okay, so while he's pulling that up, the gentleman in the back?
These are the 7 neighborhoods right here.
Yeah, so we could really see it that well from where we're sitting.
Okay, and I think we'll have the presentation up. I'd be happy to provide it after this.
We will share this afterward for folks to know. Sorry, Doug.
Explaining on water bill, did you say it's divided into 3?
So-
Sewer, water,
Yeah.
and stormwater?
So, yes, currently monthly.
So are these increases just for the stormwater contract?
Correct.
And garbage, that's a good point, and garbage on there. So yes, these are just related to stormwater, and the point I made is if the methodology is moved to an assessment, what you would see on your utility is the stormwater would come off, and it would be actually on your tax bill if the methodology change in how we assess it is made.
I believe, yes, Barb.
So just clarify again on the collection and the billing. So are you saying that if it's an assessment, then you're taking the hit in one payment on an annual basis?
It would be on your annual tax bill, yes.
And that's for the differential for a condo and not, or would switch to that for everybody?
It would switch that for the entire city, for every parcel within the city that's being built.
All right, last question, young lady here.
My question, I'm sorry I didn't go through the stuff that you guys sent by email, but my question is, for this particular project, do the calculation include the volume of water that becomes stormwater for us because of the ocean water that comes under and over and through our neighborhoods?
So it's definitely, and I know staff's here in the back, so they could probably answer that in a lot more details to the exact projects that are in here. But I can tell you broadly, as we looked at the rate study, that is one of the considerations. Some of these projects are meant to address that ocean outfall that's actually receiving the stormwater.
It's stormwater, right?
Yeah.
It's not really stormwater.
No, it's not,
really
but it's one of the things. So, there's a number of items, technical solutions to try to solve that problem.
So that's included in this?
I would have to defer to
Dr.
city staff, but I
Gaffney?
believe there are elements in here that address that. Mhm.
Okay. All right, so Marilyn is the chair of the Infrastructure Task Force, tracks these and other infrastructure issues, is going to address the importance of this, the urgency of it, before we call for a vote.
Okay, so as Kyle said, the commission's going to be voting on this very, very shortly. And the mayor was very adamant that he wanted to get a sense from the community before he took this step. So I want to just say one very fast thing about this. I mean, this is a wonderful presentation. I'm a nerd. I could listen to this all day long. The bottom line in this, and the bottom line for the Infrastructure Task Force, well, one of the bottom lines was equity. Now, we're going to be spending a lot of money on infrastructure, water, sewer, storm. And we were very concerned that the rates were equitable, that everybody got to pay their fair share. And this is a question of equity. This is Mrs. Jones's house, okay? She pays X amount of money in storm sewer fees. If this piece of property had 10 units on it, or 5 units on it if it was a townhouse, okay? Those people are paying less money than Mrs. Jones. And they're using the same streets, they're going to the same doctor's appointments, they're doing everything that Mrs. Jones is doing that they have traditionally been paying significantly less. So the concept of moving to trip generation, the hybrid method, is in many respects not only a methodology of raising money, which we could raise money by just raising the fees to everybody 54%, but trying to shift the burden to be more equitable between the homeowners, the condo owners, and especially between the commercial users. Who benefits more from a free-flowing street system than Publix? Because the customers have to come and go, and they have traditionally not been paying what we consider to be their fair share. So I'm going to make a motion that we support the hybrid system as a methodology going forward to raise stormwater fees, to fund the stormwater system and its improvements, and that is the motion that I'm making on the floor tonight.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Doctor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 3 opposed.
Understood.
Okay, understand. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Absolutely, happy to
And
be
we'll
here.
have you back with any other questions. Appreciate it. All right.
So it's
Yeah, we'll
short-term
pass
rental,
tonight, but-
thank you, single-family home, or would they be commercial?
Say that for your, that's the position. All right. So apparently, those were the key topics of interest. I'm sorry. All right. Okay, guys, we're going to keep moving on so we can be out of here at a reasonable hour. Our next topic is anyone that arrived late after roll call, please check in with Christina so we have your neighborhood identified on a roll call list, okay? All right, so our next presenter is Jackie Arroyo from the U.S. Census 2020. We're launching the census this month. Hello, everybody. Can I have your attention, please?
Everybody, wait, we're still in the meeting. Yeah. Please.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, who joins us from the U.S. Census Bureau and covers this region, and is going to address and answer any questions. And thank you to Jania from the city staff for bringing this topic to our meeting tonight. Thank you. If I could ask everyone to stop side conversations, thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to come to speak with you today about the importance of the census and the benefits of being counted. If you can't hear me, just let me know, and I'll talk louder. As just mentioned, my name is Jacqueline Arroyo. I'm a partnership specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. And in that capacity, I help to create partners with local governments, organizations, communities, and businesses to increase awareness, motivate people, and promote census participation. As many of you may know, the U.S. Census Bureau is the federal government's largest statistical agency. And we are dedicated to providing current facts and figures on America's people, places, and economy. And we can achieve that because we conduct more than 100 surveys of households and businesses across the nation each year. But in addition to that survey,
Oh, you're over it. I'm sorry. One more time. I can't do it.
Okay.
wrong one.
Is it?
Now we're done with it.
I don't know anything about it.
Thank you, Kelly.
I wasn't sure where we put hers.
I keep talking. In addition to the 100 surveys that the Census Bureau conducts, the U.S. Constitution requires that once a decade, we conduct a count. Thank you. Or a census of the American population. Now, the first decennial census was conducted in 1790. And on April 1st, 2020, our nation will conduct its 24th decennial census. Now, the purpose of the census is to count every person living in the United States once, only once, and in the right place. Now, you might ask yourself, why is it important that everyone be counted? It really boils down to two primary reasons: power and money. When I'm talking about power, I'm talking about political power. Well, you see, the results of the census determines how many seats in Congress the state receives. In other words, the number of congressional seats in the House of Representatives is adjusted based on census population. State and local governments use our counts to redraw boundaries for districts, like congressional districts, state legislative districts, and even school districts. When I'm talking about money, I'm talking about economic impact. So responding to the census gives your community, helps your community ensure that it gets its fair share of federal funding. The results of the census helps guide how more than $675 billion in federal funds are distributed to states and local communities every year. That equates to more than $4 trillion over a decade. And communities use these funds to create jobs, build roads, build schools. It helps fund social services programs like CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program, and SNAP, the food stamp program, Medicaid, Medicare Part B. Helps fund education, such as Head Start, special education, the National Free Lunch Program, Title I schools, and helps fund emergency preparedness programs like 911 and FEMA. So for example, if we should get hit by a hurricane tomorrow, FEMA has funds set aside to help the state of Florida stand back up after the hurricane hits us. But guess what? The amount of money they have set aside is based on census population. But in addition to power and money, responding to the census is our way of participating in our own democracy. So we're saying I count. But because of the constitutional importance of the census, we're required to respond by law. When I talk about political power, I just wanted to show you what happened in the last census, which was 2010. Based upon the population count that we had in 2010, Florida gained 2 additional seats in the House of Representatives. Louisiana lost a seat. North Carolina stayed the same, but they were within a few thousand from gaining an additional seat. So there are some winners and losers to when we count. So we talked about how important the census is, but also responding to the census is safe, it's secure, and it's protected by federal law. So Title 13 of the U.S. Code requires the Census Bureau to protect personal information that it collects and to keep it strictly confidential. We can only use your responses for statistical purposes. And census employees like myself are required to take an oath to protect personal information for life. If we should violate that oath, I could be fined with $250,000 and up to 5 years in prison. So I'm not going to do that. In addition, your response to the census can never be used against you. It can never be called for from the AFL agency, the court system, FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, immigration. No one can use that information against you. And finally, under Title 44 of the U.S. Code, your responses to the census is sealed for 72 years. That's 72 years. So I don't know where you're going to be in 72 years, but I'm not going to be worried about what I put down in the census. So the census is important, the census is safe, but it's also easy to respond to. In prior census cycles, households were sent a paper questionnaire, you were asked to fill it out, and to send it back to us. For the 2020 census, you're going to have a variety of ways to respond to it. You can respond online, by phone, or by mail. And online, what I'm saying is a tool or instrument that you have that can access the internet can be used to respond to the census. Your cell phone, your iPad, your laptop. And the Census Bureau encourages online response as the primary method of responding because it's the most cost-efficient way to collect this type of information. Census research has shown that a 1% of the population shift from paper to online would save the federal government $15 million. That's $107 per census questionnaire. So you can understand why we're trying to encourage everyone to do it online. But by chance, if you're not comfortable with doing it online, you'll also get a toll-free number where you can call the information in to a census employee. And if you respond to the census online or by phone, we have 12 non-English providers to assist you. So if you speak Russian, for example, and you want to do the census online, you can change that English questionnaire to a questionnaire that's in Russian. If you speak Creole, Haitian Creole, for example, and you want to call in your information, we have Haitian Creole speakers that can take your call. And if by chance you don't want to do it online or by phone, you can always go old school and do it with paper and pencil, and we'll even provide the stamp for you to send back to us. Okay. So let me give you a little bit of information on the timeline. So invitations to respond online or by phone we started to be mailed out March 12th. So less than 2 months from now, be mailed out to all households. Those individuals or households that don't respond, you'll be receiving reminder notices periodically, and then you'll eventually get the paper questionnaire. Between April 20th and April 27th will be when you get the final reminder notice that we need you to complete the questionnaire. And between mid-May and the end of July, census takers will go door to door to count people who did not respond. And that is the most expensive way of collecting this information. So we're hoping that we won't have to send out a lot of census takers. So the success of the census is determined by participation rates of households across the United States. And in the 2010 census, the national mail return rate was 72%. What does that mean? So 72% of the households across the nation returned their census questionnaire before we went out to do the door-to-door enumeration process. You'll see in some publications, you'll see a national return rate of 74%. The additional 2% was after we went door-to-door, what we got back. So this slide that you're looking at, all the numbers reflect before the enumeration process. So as you can see, Florida in 2000 had a 71% response rate. In 2010, they had a 74% response rate. Broward has 70% and then 73% response rate. Fort Lauderdale, where we are right now, has 60% response rate in 2000 and a 67% response rate in 2010. That meant that 67% of the households in Fort Lauderdale responded to the census. So if 67% responded, I mean 33% did not respond. And is there a cost for not responding? Well, we talked about the political process, Louisiana losing a seat, North Carolina staying the same even though there were only a few people shy of getting additional seats. So there's a cost right there. But is there a dollar cost for not responding to the census? Well, George Washington University came up with a figure. This is not the census figure, this is George Washington University, so we didn't come up with the numbers. And George Washington did this study in 2015. And what they came out with was that for every person who does not respond to the census, it costs their local community $1,450 per person per year. Wow. So a family of 4 in Fort Lauderdale, for the first year will cost us $5,800. Over 10 years, which is how long the data is used, it will cost $58,000, almost $60,000. That's a family of 4. And we had 33% who didn't respond. So as you can see, we're leaving millions of dollars on the table that we could more likely want to use right here in Fort Lauderdale.
So that's even after the census takers went knock on doors?
This was before. So it should be a little better, hopefully after. So because we have so many scams going on nowadays, we wanted to mention to you that that the census will never ask you for your Social Security number. We'll never ask you for a donation. We'll never say that we're there on behalf of any political party. We'll never ask for your PIN codes, passwords, access to credit cards or checking account information. If someone says they're from the census and they're asking you for this type of information, you can happily close the door, hang up the phone, because that's not us. Okay? So how can you help? What are we asking for? Primarily, we're asking you to help us spread the word. Help us educate people that the census is easy, it's safe, and it's really important to complete. But for this community, we have some special asks for, because, you know, we come out with our census takers. If people don't respond to the other 3 ways that we're asking them to respond, we have to go out to households, to neighborhoods. And if you're representing communities that are in gated communities, if you're in condominiums that are locked doors, we have a problem getting in. So what we're asking you, if you would help us educate your community about the census. First of all, explain to them that if they respond online, or by phone, or by paper, we won't show up to ask you anything. We only go to households that have not responded. But if you have a gated community, a manned gated community, if you can talk with your security staff and let them know that census employees will be coming around starting in mid-May. And it's by law that we have to have access, entrance into the community to get to the households. If you have a clubhouse, or if you have regular meetings with your residents, if you can talk about the census, help them understand the timeline, help them understand why it's important and why we'll be coming. And again, back to we won't come if you respond one of these 3 ways. That would help us out a lot. If you have a gated community or gated building without a manned person on there, we need to get some information on how we can access that location, how can we access the households, because we have to get in. And hopefully we can use this association, this council, if we have some communities where we are having problems getting access to. Okay. The other thing is that we have jobs available right now. We're hiring right now for census takers. You have to be 18 years of age or older, U.S. citizen. It's primarily evenings, weekends. It's a part-time temporary job from mid-May until the end of July. We're paying $17.50 an hour. You work from home and you stay in your own community. So if you live in Plantation, you're not going to work in Lauderdale, kind of thing. And literally, we're hiring right now. They're making calls for people who are in the call bank. I left the flyer out there. We don't need a resume. You just go online, you put in your application, and they'll be making calls to individuals. It's a great job, especially if you want to make extra money, and especially if you're a college student, because it's great money and it's over the summertime. Do you have any questions?
It's beautiful. So we're going to cut it off at 3 questions. We've got to move on. So Christina, Barbara, and Dr. Getz.
Would you be able to, if I email you, would you be able to provide me with some type of JPEG that I could share with the members here so that they can put it in their e-newsletters, not on hiring, but on the census itself?
Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
We also have PSAs if you want to put them on your website.
Great, perfect. I'll email you. Thank you.
My question is, in our neighborhood, we have a lot of snowbirds. How is it determined which, what state that they should say they're from that census, and how do you know, if they've, New York, and they entered it in New York, and then they have a house here, where you're saying, okay, 73%, 33 didn't answer the census.
Sure.
How do you deal with that?
That's a great question. So the rule of thumb is wherever you live or sleep, most of the time is where you complete your census. So if you live or sleep, if it's not half and half, most things aren't half and half, it's then wherever you are on April 1st, 2020. That's where you complete your census form. Snowbirds use our roads, they use our systems, they use 911, we want to count them as well. Now, if they fill out a form here and they fill out a form in New York, then they're double counted. We have algorithms in the system that can catch those double counts, and on our census form, which is only 10 questions by the way, we ask, do you live in any other locations?
So primary residence, and defer to Florida. Dr. Getz, last question quickly, please.
Do you poll every household, and how do you handle non-citizen immigrants and homeless?
So yes, the letter invitation goes to every household, not to individuals, but every household. And we want to count everyone in the household. Even that brother that came in January and says he's only going to stay 2 weeks and he's still there by April, you want to count him, because in your household. Homeless individuals experience homeless, we have a separate count for them. All over the nation on March 30th, March 31st, and April 1st, we have census employees that go out into the community, and we count on March 30th, people living in shelters. On March 31st, soup kitchens, mobile food kitchens, those type of places we are at. And on April 1st, we're counting individuals who are not living in any kind of shelters, who are on the streets. We partnered with a lot of the homeless associations and groups. So we have the locations of where the majority of these people are. We're going out, we're actually doing interviews. What was the last part?
Non-citizens.
Non-citizens. You have to be living in the U.S. to be counted on the census. If you're just visiting, then you're not counted. If you're actually living here, you are from England, but you actually live here in the States, 3 months, 6 months. If you're living here, we need to count you because you're using our services.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll share summary data. We're gonna move on, guys. Okay, so we'll show more information. Thank you. Send follow-up questions. Please help me thank Jackie. All right. Last but not least, we've got Carl Ann. This is a long overdue topic, Central Beach Code updates. It's I think folks are gonna really like this. Before we do this, we talked about short-term vacation rentals, the legislation. This was opposed by the council last year. We didn't specifically call for a motion for the council to oppose it this year. Sounds like it's even more restrictive for local jurisdictions to be enforcing any code violations, etc., for local Airbnbs and short-term vacation rentals. So the motion, can I hear someone make this motion to oppose the legislation and the approval for the council to transmit that to elected officials?
So moved.
No. So moved. What do you mean, no?
We were going to discuss and have more discussion first. I just ran it by Marilyn, but I didn't get back here.
No. I don't think there's any question we oppose this. Right.
You have a motion on the floor. You have
Yes.
someone who's made a motion.
Okay. A second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Wait,
Discussion. Discussion. Thank you, Robert's Rules experts. Appreciate it. Yes.
The reason I would suggest that we don't do this right now is that the bill is in flux right now. There are a couple of good things in this bill. Requirement for registration and licensing at the state level, so the taxes can be elected, and especially so that the listings on Airbnb type things can be related to the license. If you don't have a license, you can't list. So there are some good things in the bill, and I would suggest that we wait as this is percolating and the city manager goes up and we have lobbyists up there. We have time, in my opinion, we have time to take this motion. And I just think it's premature. It's my opinion.
Okay. Other discussion? Christina, Jim, and then...
I want to add to the discussion. The thing that could incorporate what Marilyn is suggesting is we could oppose it, and then we can go to our elected officials and say, we want this, this, and this. Whatever you're finding in that bill that is causing you to say, let's not act on this now, we can oppose the bill today, but then ask our elected officials to give us whatever added protections you see are existing there.
Totally agree. Love that. Jim?
Exactly what I was...
Okay, great. All right. Yes, sir?
We need to nip this in the bud early on. Right now, there's a big push. The lobbyists, the Marriott Hotel, which used to be on our side, is now going into the vacation rental business. There were huge lobbyists helping us. Now they're on the other side of the fence. There's a huge push, and we need to get it through every committee before. We can't wait because we like one thing in it.
Right.
We gotta nip this one, cut it off, and if they come through with this other stuff that we like in another bill, maybe the next year, that's fine. But we have to look at it.
Okay, so the motion is amended to say we will oppose, there are elements of the legislation that are important and that we require, right, or need, but with that caveat, we can have it all reviewed by everybody. Does that make more sense as an amended motion?
No, that's not a clear motion at all.
Okay, make it clear.
So I think what you're trying to say is you're asking for a motion for the Council of Civic Associations to transmit a communication opposing SB 1128 and follow up with the commission on things that we would like to see in our city legislation.
In revised.
That's acceptable.
Thank you.
Okay, so but the council communication is to whom? The state elected officials, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. So that's, okay, so, a second?
There are two,
Okay.
there are two bills, there's 1101.
Okay.
There's an SB and an A.
All right.
Yeah, the companion bill, HB 1011.
Okay, so do you have time to read the fully amended motion?
So the motion is for the Council of Civic Associations to transmit communication to elected officials and committee members opposing SB 1128 and companion bill HB 1011, and to transmit to city officials recommendations on what we would like to see revised in our local ordinance.
Second for that? Second? I want to hear a second. All in favor? All right, great. Any opposed? Thank you. All right.
It's unanimous.
Pardon?
It's unanimous.
Do you want to be sitting up here? We have two open board positions, Dr. Getz. Come on up. All right. Okay, guys, we're going to end with our final and wonderful presenter, Caroline Grant from...
Because that wasn't the motion language.
Are we done?
Yeah, we're done.
All right. May I present Caroline Grant, urban planner from the city of Fort Lauderdale. Please give her a warm welcome to talk to us.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. Again, I'm with the Department of Sustainable Development in the Urban Design and Planning Division, and I'm here to present the proposed changes for the Central Beach zoning districts. And let me know if I'm not loud enough. I tend to talk very softly, so just...
Can everyone hear Caroline?
The speakers are on now.
Okay,
Great. Very well.
All right, perfect. So on today's agenda, I'll be talking about the introduction of tables for the uses and the new standards for dimensional requirements. I'll be going over the revised language for the design compatibility point system. I'll be introducing new open space requirements, and then also providing new standards that should encourage active street environment. I should preface by saying that we did have an open house in October of last year, and then we followed up with presenting to the Central Beach Alliance. So the same presentation that we have here is what was presented late last year to everyone.
Okay.
So just letting you all know, the zoning districts that are being affected is the entire Central Beach. So if you're living in Central Beach, between SPMHA, which is the South Beach Marina district, all the way over to the Sunrise Lane area district, will all be affected with some changes to the code. So one of the first changes is basically making the section a little bit more user-friendly. Right now, the language is very verbose. It's formatted in paragraphs, and it's very hard for folks and for even staff to find information quickly in order to provide it to you. And so what we're doing is providing all the uses in a format of tables similar to how we have it in the rest of the zoning code. Our next change is providing standard requirements for yard. So the setbacks in some of the zoning districts are not very not standard. And so what we're proposing is to have standard setback requirements, as well as introducing shoulder height, tower setback, and tower separation. So with the setbacks, for instance, now it'll be based on the height. So for instance, if your height for the building is between 0 to 35 feet, then your setbacks will be 10 feet. And then if you go 35 to 75 feet, then the setbacks will then be 20 feet, based on whether it's side or rear. Right now, that's not how it is. So it helps for everyone to have a more predictive vision of what will be there or what will be developed. And then we're also introducing the tower setback. So to give a visual idea of what we're talking about, if you take a look right now, for instance, the setbacks, so the setbacks, again, if you're at 35 feet, will be setback 10 feet, and then if you go up to 75 feet, then your setback will be 20, so on and so forth. The other visual depiction would be showing the tower separation. So a requirement would be having tower separation for each building that will create a 60-foot tower separation in total. So the intent behind providing a podium and shoulder height is to provide a more light and air between the buildings, to provide more human framing, and then to help address building scale. The other change would be the tower separation, and again, that also helps with providing air and light between buildings and limiting the impact of building mass. One of the other changes would be changing the compatibility point system. This only applies to the ABA and PRD zoning district, which is the A1A beach area, and then the PRD is the planned resort district. So right now, the language is very vague and very difficult to administer. So an example would be, you can get 1 point if you have color and composition that reflects the natural colors and composition of South Florida. You know, another one is architectural design that represents a deviation from sameness. And you can get a point in order for you to have extra height or extra floor area, FAR, floor area ratio. So what staff wanted to do is provide language that's more prescriptive and you can actually see the changes and improvements. So one of the changes would be internalizing loading zones. And so you'll get a point for that, and that's pretty hard to do. But you'll see the changes based on the design. You can also get a point if you provide more open space. So you'll get to actually feel and see the changes with that. So that should help with the compatibility system. The new change would be providing open space requirements. Right now we don't have that for the Central Beach, so we're doing it based on residential and non-residential development. So if you're a residential development, it's based on the amount of density, the amount of units that you're providing. So for instance, if you have 50 units or less, then you have to provide 200 square foot of open space. If you're non-residential, then you'll need to provide 20% of the lot size. And that open space could be broken up. So you can have open space at the ground level, and then you can also, if it's a high rise, you can also provide it above grade. So that should also help to break it up. And then of course, if it's a mixed use, then you can do the higher of the two. One of the other changes would be providing standards that to help with active uses on the ground level. So one of our changes is requiring developers to provide a 13-foot sidewalk for primary streets and then 7-foot for secondary streets, and providing required street trees, appropriate trees for the beach. So making sure that it could withstand salt and things like that. So right now in the code we have people streets, and all we're doing with the people streets is changing the name. So we're rebranding it from people streets to secondary streets, but we're introducing primary streets. So the secondary and primary streets are identified to help with pedestrian and vehicular traffic. So those that have high foot traffic and high vehicular traffic, we're hoping to make changes to help with making sure that those streets have the 13-foot sidewalk, for instance, or the 7-foot sidewalk, and having shade trees along those areas. So the secondary streets you'll see there in yellow, and the primary streets are in red. And that's about it. Our next step is to be moving forward with planning and zoning board, hopefully in March, and then we're hoping to have this in front of the commissioner for first and second reading in late April, early May. Any questions?
Excuse me? John, you're from Central Beach, right? So was there a consensus from your community about this?
There was no vote taken, but there was a presentation.
And was there feedback from your community? No good, bad, indifferent, nothing?
One of the feedback was they like it because it sets some design.
Yeah.
The other feedback is it's a little late in terms of all the building that I'm.
Right. Okay.
Almost all the building.
All right. Dr. Gitt, you had your hand up.
Yeah, are any of the areas in the central beach within the FEMA flood map zones? And if they are, is there any consideration to requiring increasing, like putting on stilts or anything?
Stilts? Did you just stilts?
Good evening, Jim Hetzel, Principal Urban Planner. I know Carly looking to get up here. Just to answer that question, the entire city is under FEMA maps as far as finished floor elevations for any construction. That's dependent on what flood zone the subject property is in. The beach is obviously sensitive depending on where you are located on the beach. There is the high ridge point, which is where A1A is, which is where a lot of resorts are. That has a higher ridge. And then you have North Beach, which kind of slopes down. So depending on those elevation ranges, we have to follow FEMA plus whatever our code, our land development code says you have to add so many feet depending on that elevation. So there are requirements for the finished floor to be higher. Those standards were changed in the past recent years, dealing with some issues with sea level rise. So depending on where you are, those standards adjust, depending on the finished floor, the grade level.
Did you have a question, Christina?
No, I just wanted to know what Central Beach thought of this. You answered it.
Marilyn?
Just two questions. The introduction of the open space ratio, is that a new requirement, or is this, or is that a change to the existing requirements?
That would be new.
So then my second question is, that's wonderful, but in the open space requirements for the residential buildings, do all the open space have to be at grade?
No, she said it.
I know in the commercial buildings, you said you could split it up, but does it have to be at grade? And let's cut it short. Allowing the developer to put the required open space on the second floor, third floor, the rooftop pool, to me is not open space. That's an amenity for the particular developer. We never see it, we never feel it, we never enjoy it. So I would say that particular thing, if you're going to introduce an open space ratio, which is a good thing, more land, more trees, more grass, et cetera, then it should all be on the ground level where it is truly open space, even if it's not public open space.
So you'll take that recommendation?
That's my
Okay.
recommendation.
Last thought, Allison.
Can you go back to the slide that talks about the different heights, and it references for a mixed use that you can utilize the highest of the options? What's the reasoning for that?
Oh, that would be for the open space.
Oh, so can you explain then for mixed use what they need to do?
So for mixed use, let's say you have residential and you have commercial, but commercial only provides, let's say, 1,000 square feet, whereas if you do up the residential requirement, you'll get 1,500 square feet. You'll go with the 1,500 square feet.
Okay, so, we've got a suggestion from Maryland. I would recommend, John, that your community come forward with specific thoughts and feedback, so we have that on record as well. You're not asking this council to place a vote on this, you're just sharing this information?
No, just sharing.
Okay. Last question, quickly.
Hi, just a question.
And what neighborhood are you from? Sorry.
Lauderdale Isles.
Okay.
But I see the problem downtown, we've got all these new developments, and a lot of them do allow dogs, but they're not providing places for the dogs to go out. So where are those dogs going to go out to? If they don't have a place on their property provided, then they're going somewhere else, which makes it not very appealing for the public to go use. Such as the Riverwalk down here. We're having a problem with that.
I'm getting the look. Just for clarification, the city doesn't regulate having dog area or dog parks in the sense of a requirement on a development. There's open space requirements for the need for open space based on residents and having that. How that's regulated by a private developer for their own property, I think you see dog signs saying, it's a city code requirement that you pick up after your dog too. So that's not just on public land, but that's also on private property. That is a city ordinance. So whether they do it or not, as a dog walker, I have a dog, they should be picking up after their dogs no matter what. but we don't regulate as far as you have to provide so much space for your dog walks. So if they want to walk their dog down a public street, they're more than welcome to. They have to pick up after their dog.
Well, we all know that doesn't always happen.
That doesn't always happen, and as like I said, I'm a dog owner.
Going forward, would it be possible for the city to put something like that? Like, if you're gonna have a building where you're going to allow dogs, you must provide a place for dogs to go.
It's something that can be considered, but again, that's a policy decision that the commission will have to do. Right now, we don't have any regulations like that whatsoever.
Okay. All right, thank you very much for your presentation, Carl-Ann. Last piece of business are just upcoming events. So MLK Day, just, if you want to volunteer, your neighborhood get NCIP points. So if you go Monday morning and sign in with your neighborhood, just make sure that you write down your neighborhood, take an iPhone photo of it, 500 NCIP points. So there's 4 different projects you can participate in. Wednesday, January 29th, GovChat, that's part of NLA's Neighborhood Leaderships Academy program. They almost have a full contingent, that's great. Black History Month, there's an Eventbrite for that. And I think the event that we're all really invested in annually is Neighbor Support Night. So the council is up at the front as you enter. Betty Shelley is at the helm there. If you'd like to volunteer that night, it's a wonderful event. You get to meet all the different departments within the city, and free tchotchkes and food and ice cream and music. And this year's theme, and they decided this before the main breaks, what's this year's theme? Does anybody know? Venice of America. All right. So, yeah, no, it's still.
Now we love our neighbors.
Oh, you changed it. I didn't even know that. Okay.
Yeah, look at those guys. We love our neighbors.
That's even better. Okay. All right. So with that, we'll see you next month. We're having our February meeting during Valentine's Day week. Hint, hint. And we're going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
Horrible.